Hey everybody, welcome back to the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast, where we hear stories and have conversations about life in Christ, integrating our faith into every area of our life, and talk about ways that we as men can give life to others, at home, at work, and in the community. My name is Tom Henderson, the founder of RESGEN, and I am so pumped you are joining me for today's episode. And trust me when I say this, you are going to be so glad you did, because my guest today is Melmer, a friend of mine and absolutely, positively one of the best dudes on the planet. Seriously, just listen to what makes up Rick's resume. He was a teacher, the superintendent of schools in a couple different states, the dean of education for the University of South Dakota, and the secretary of education for the State of South Dakota. He's also the founder of Leadership South Dakota, and most importantly, is a follower of Jesus, a husband, a father, and a grandfather. See, I told you he's one of the best. On today's show, Rick and I focus our conversation on the topic of transition, both in leadership and in the different seasons of our lives. Throughout this episode, Rick speaks candidly about the feelings he has as he handed off the organization he founded to the next generation of leaders, and what he learned about both himself and the Lord in the process. We also talk about how he has been able to still fulfill his purpose as he moves towards retirement, and what he thinks the older generation can do to better support and encourage the younger generation, and what the younger generation can do to better appreciate and honor the older one. This is definitely going to be a helpful and wisdom-filled episode, so let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Rick Melmer. Rick Melmer, man, it is good to have you back here, dude.
Good to be here.
Like, seriously, do you realize that you were on episode one, or excuse me, not episode one, but in season one, one of our early episodes. Right. And so I just think it's right to have you back here as we're now just a few episodes into season 5.
Yeah, that's great. I'm happy to be back. And the time flies, doesn't it?
It really does. And yet you still look the same.
No, I don't.
You still got that same youthful energy and vigor to you.
Thanks. Yeah, you should get your eyes checked too. Yeah. So no, I don't look the same, but I feel really good and I'm grateful for that. So,
well, Rick, I know that some of our listeners will probably have listen to you on our season 1 episode that we did together. And then, of course, maybe they just know you through different channels, in the different roles you've played in this region, in the state, and so forth. But for those of you of them that maybe don't know who you are, I'd love for you just to give it like a brief overview.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we're gonna dig into what I think is gonna be a real meaningful and helpful conversation. I think it's going to be meaningful and helpful to me, number one.
I hope so.
But to a lot of people as well. So,
sure.
Intro yourself, would you?
Yeah. So I'm a husband and I'm a father of 3, all married kids, and grandfather of 9, which we love that, and it's great for my wife and I to enjoy that chapter of our lives. Longtime educator. I was a teacher for elementary school teacher, elementary principal for 7 years. Superintendent for 12 in 2 different locations, Sioux Center, Iowa, and Watertown, South Dakota. I served under Governor Rounds as Secretary of Education for 5 years, from 2008 to 13, and then I was a dean of the School of Education at USD for 5, and then started the program Leadership South Dakota. My wife and I did that, and did it for 9 years and loved it. And in 2023, we stepped away from that, and so now I'm kind of working my way towards retirement. I'm not doing well at it right now, but I'm working my way towards it. So.
I called you out of retirement to do a podcast with me.
That's right. I enjoy this sort of thing.
You're just like Michael Jordan when he decided to come out of retirement and play a little bit longer. That's what you're doing here.
Exactly. There we go. I feel good about that. Yeah, me and Mike.
Well, that's a great introduction, because I mean, what you just and that's what I really wanted to focus our conversation around today, Rick. When we had talked about the possibility of coming back on and for us to have a conversation here, I did want to kind of focus our conversation around this whole idea of transitions, because you have experienced not just the transition that you're going through now, which we're eventually going to get to, but just transitions in life, in location, in just not so much career, because you've kind of been in the educator career, but in wearing different hats within that career. And, one of the questions that I get asked a lot from guys, especially, is like, how do I know if I'm supposed to make a move job-wise?
Yeah.
How do I know when one season is coming to an end and another one is beginning? Or, should I stick this out longer? All those kinds of questions.
Right.
So I'd love to hear from you as you look back on your body of work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As you think about the different transitions you had, how are those decisions made? And, obviously Val's probably a part of those. The Lord was a part of those.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's right. I think part of the challenge is kind of maybe knowing where you want to end helps you decide the path that you're going to take to get there. When Valerie and I got married and we were moving around a little bit, I just told her, at some point in time, I'd love to be a superintendent in a district in South Dakota. We love South Dakota and would love to end up in a district, of some size in South Dakota. So we always knew that was kind of part of the plan. Mm-hmm. So when I got some advice, good advice from Jim Beto, a friend of mine who's no longer with us now. He passed away a couple years ago, but Jim just said, Rick, I think you should get your doctorate degree out of the state, move away, get away. You can always come back. So Valerie was willing. I married to a woman who was willing to move and willing to sacrifice on my behalf, and she did. And we moved to Wyoming and got the degree done. And then it was a matter of like, okay, now we're going to start this plan of how do we get back to South Dakota in a place where we would both be comfortable with. And I think once we knew where we wanted to be long-term, it was easier to make short-term decisions because we knew that, okay, first job is going to have to be a small town superintendent role to get some experience before I could move to the next role. Mm-hmm. And that was Sioux Center, Iowa, which was great for us. And so part of it is I had to have a plan, but I also had to have God included in that plan because sometimes if I was left to my own devices, I would have made some bad decisions, but God sort of protected me from some of those or protected us from some of those and laid a path for us that just sort of made good sense. And if we weren't prayers, I don't know for sure if it would have been that easy to do, but because we were, it really helped us really make like kind of good foundational decisions that I think really, really served us well in the long term. Yeah. Because there were a couple of times along the way where I interviewed for a job thinking maybe this is the job I should take. And we were praying about it consistently. And then God would sort of take that away. Like either I wasn't getting offered the job or I lost interest in the position. And I couldn't explain it because it was like a really good job that appears like on the surface I should take, but I'm not feeling it. I don't have that desire. And that happened to us a couple of times. And I think it was like God's way of going, no, that's not the one.
So I want to come back to that in a second, but I first want to say, for those of you that maybe are listening or viewing, we can see you get a little emotional there. And I love that. I love that because I'm an emotional dude. I start talking.
I'm glad you love it. I'm not crazy about it.
Well, I do because
I have a hard time.
But that's your heart.
It.
But that's your heart coming out, right?
Yeah.
And I think that when we allow ourselves to really allow our heart to come out, there's just that authenticity that's there. And anybody that knows you knows the authenticity that you bring to the table. And so I'm first of all very appreciative of that. But I want to ask, so where did that emotion come from today? As you think, because it was at this time where you just talked about like you making it Proverbs 69. Right. We make our plans, but yet the Lord
directs our paths.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So where did that come from today? Was there a specific thing that you thought of, or?
I think there's kind of two things. One of them is genetics. I think my mother was kind of a crier, and I think I'm a little bit of a crier too. We used to make fun of her all the time, and now I'm the one that people make fun of in our family. But also, I feel like gratefulness, kind of that idea that at times when we were uncertain, God made a way.
Yeah.
And we needed that. I needed that because I would be uncertain a lot. There would be a lot of times when I would wrestle back and forth, should I or shouldn't I? And I felt like the Lord sort of helped me and guided me. And I'm married to a godly woman who also provided really good counsel, would say, Rick, I'm not sure about that, or what do you think about this? So I had a good sounding board there too. But if I get emotional now, it's rarely about sad. It's usually about gratefulness.
Yeah.
God's provided.
Oh, that's so good. And that's a good reminder too, I think, for all of us, because especially when you're going through storms, challenges, it's so easy for us, or like even for you, you say, well, man, I really thought I was going to get this job. I thought this was going to work out. And then it didn't. We tend to focus on, well, wait, I thought I was going to get this job. I thought and then we can forget about, oh no, God is on the throne. God is in control. And yet, even though we didn't get what we think we deserved or what we wanted, there's still so much to be grateful for, even in those difficult times.
Right. Right. And I think if you have a bit of a spiritual base, you begin to realize, well, I guess this wasn't God's plan for me. Instead of being angry or frustrated about, or what did I do wrong? How did I botch the interview? Instead, it's like, well, I guess that isn't a door that God's going to open right now. And I feel like if you have that ability to look at it that way, then it makes it a bit easier to figure out that I guess that isn't the right path and there's a different and a better way. Mm-hmm. And frankly, God just revealed that to us so many times. Mm-hmm. Like, no, I've got something better waiting for you. And I didn't always trust it until it happened. And then it's like, okay, now I guess I see it. And the more it happened, the more you begin to trust that God does have a plan for us.
Yeah. Well, and we were talking a little bit before we started recording here about, you mentioned some research that was done by Gallup.
Yeah.
And just share that, because I mean, when I heard it, I didn't necessarily think that it was going to come up at the table, but I feel like it really kind of speaks a little bit to what you're talking about right now.
Yeah. Well, essentially they just said that, they researched a bunch of people about the idea of like, what's the best thing that ever happened to you and the worst thing that ever happened to you? And what's the correlation between the two? And the research proved that 80% of the time, the best and the worst things were the same. In other words, the best thing that ever happened to me and the worst thing that ever happened to me are the same thing. Which really means that God can bring light to darkness, and at times when I think there's no end to this issue I'm dealing with, and then all of a sudden I find out without that I wouldn't be who I am today. I wouldn't have made the move. I wouldn't have met the person. Yeah. All of the things that went on. And in Leadership South Dakota, we used to ask a general question: share a time when your life changed for the better. And so all 40 people would get up and in a 2-minute summary. A time when my life changed for the better. And you would be surprised, Tom, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, how many times people brought up something negative, right? Like, I lost a job. And then guess what? As a result of that, this happened. My girlfriend broke up with me. Guess what? As a result of that, I met this woman, and now we're married, whatever. Yeah. So it's just all those things, like something negative happened. And now I look back on it and go, that was a time when my life changed for the better. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things where it just reinforces over and over again this idea that if you're going through a difficult time, don't lose hope, because it's probably part of a plan that you just don't understand.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's Maxwell, John Maxwell, that says, you don't just go through it, you grow through it.
Yeah.
Right. That's and right. Just this right. When no one would choose to go through it. But as you look back on it, and hindsight is most often 20/20, yeah. You look back and say, man, this is how I grew through that. I think about when I had to I was let go from my youth pastor position in Oregon City, not because of anything that I had done, but because the lead pastor resigned. And in the Nazarene denomination, in that context of that, it was when the lead pastor resigns, the entire staff resigns. Yeah, so they can bring in their hockey line chains, their new coaching staff, whatever. And I'm like, well, wait a second here. I think I'm doing a pretty killer job. I mean, I'm not like the second coming of Jesus to Oregon City, Oregon, or anything, but I think I've done a pretty decent job, and got 6 years of youth ministry under my belt. And oh, by the way, I've got a 3-year-old and a 1-month-old, so this isn't really good timing to be told that I'm going to be gone. Right. But at the same time, without that experience, which I dreaded, and Laura and I cried for 3 days. We prayed harder than we ever had, in 3 days. All of a sudden, though, fast forward 3 months, and we're back in Sioux Falls. One thing led to the next, and had that not happened, I mean, obviously we don't know, right? But had that not happened, you and I may not even know each other. We may not be sitting at this table. RESGEN may not be what it is. Yep. I mean, everything you just talked about is, and I think for all of us to be able to go back and think about those things that have happened in our past, both good and bad, and say, okay, so how did that help pave the way? And where did we see God's hand in that? Maybe not during the time, but where was God's hand in this type of situation that I didn't think I could get through? Mm-hmm. But yet, all of a sudden,
there it is. Right. No, that's right. I agree with you. If a person, and I know we're going to get to this, but as you get older, you begin to get up on the balcony and see all the things that went on in your life earlier. And I think that's when you really begin to see God's hand and how he impacted you and how he impacted family members. And I feel like sometimes when you're on the dance floor, which you are and a lot of other people younger than me are, you don't always see it as easily. Mm-hmm. But when you have a chance to get up on the balcony and look down, you kind of start to see all the different ways that God had an impact in your life.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you saying that I'm still on the dance floor. I'm dancing a lot slower than I used to. I'm not a part of the raves anymore.
How about you got some moves though, Tom?
Nobody needs to see those. But okay, so you mentioned, I wanted to go into just some of those transitions that you had maybe with younger kids. Mm-hmm. And just maybe some things that you were purposeful about doing, intentional about doing, that helped make those transitions easier on your children, on your marriage, those types of things. Because again, I think that those, like, as transitions that we choose, or transitions that are kind of chosen for us happen,
right.
We don't just go alone. Mm-hmm. We bring those that are in our circle and the families a lot of times. So was there a time or a season in your career where it was a difficult time to make a transition with your fam?
Yeah, there were a couple of those. One would have been from Sioux Center, Iowa to Watertown. And first of all, a couple things. One is I made all of mine on my own. In other words, I wasn't fired. Because if you're fired, then you say to your family, I'm sorry, I got fired and we've got to find a new job and I don't have a choice. But in all these cases, it was like my choice to move to the next one. And that would be confusing to our children when they got old enough to kind of go, so Dad, why are we moving? Like, well, I want to look at a different job, but you have a good job. And they actually would say that, like, what's wrong with this job? Because kids never, at least our experience has been, kids never wanted to move. Like wherever we are is where we want to be because this is what they know. Yeah. Right? I mean, they're 12 or they're 10 or whatever. Yeah. And they're not looking, hey, maybe I'd like to move to Watertown. No, they don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So first of all, it was my choice. And that was hard for our children to understand. Second of all, I always knew, and Valerie always had veto power. And I feel like in a couple, both sides should be able to say to the other one, no, I'm not going to do that. And she had veto power, chose not to exercise it in this particular case anyway. And so then that was important because she needed to be invested in the move as much or more than me. Because what I found was when we landed in a new spot, I was the one that had the new job and was out trying to do some things. And she was the one taking care of the three most important people in our lives, which is our children, and making sure. And so when kids would complain, our kids would complain, she would go, listen, guys, this is a good decision. This will be good for our family because she was invested in it. Mm-hmm. If she would have been invested, I think it'd have been really hard for her to be an advocate for it.
Yeah. Oh, that's and not to interrupt, but that is such a good, I think a good thought that we need to think about is that it's not just you out there Lone Ranger and making these decisions because it's good for your career.
Right.
It's you and Val as teammates.
Yes.
You are team members. You're on the same team.
Right.
Moving towards the same goals together.
Right.
And saying, Val, am I missing something here?
Yeah.
You have veto power. I think that's a great word. Mm-hmm. Let me know if we're off base here, so that then you're moving as a team. That's really good.
And then the last thing was, and I've shared, people that knew that we moved some. I get calls from younger, oftentimes school administrators, because they know I was in the school business, and they'll say, "Hey, I know you guys moved." And one of the things I always say, which I'm sure their children and our children wouldn't have appreciated, is don't let a 12-year-old decide what your next move should be, because it's not unusual for people to go, the kids don't want to move. And I always say to them, they never want to move. Like there's never going to be a time when your 12-year-old is going to say, yeah, I think we ought to make a move. It's time for you. No, they're going to say, I want to stay. And so, but they don't get to decide that. You have to decide that. And our logic was someday, and it actually happened to us, our middle daughter, Megan, made a move to Texas. And we said to our kids when they were younger, someday you might want to move. Mm-hmm. And if you do, we aren't going to say to you, no, you can't do that. You have to decide what's best for you and your family. And we're deciding now what's best our family, which we think is a move to this town or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, years later, our daughter Megan moved to Texas. We did not want her to move to Texas. Yeah. We wanted her to stay close by South Dakota, her and her husband, but they made the move and it was a great move for them. They're now back closer in Kansas City. But the point is, we didn't say to her, sorry, you can't do that, Megan.
Even though you wanted to, probably.
Even though we wanted to, right. You can't do that. And so that you shouldn't let a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old decide what your career should look like or your opportunities look like.
Mm-hmm. So were there things that you did that helped them understand that, or was it just something that you just had to say, listen, we're here to talk about it. We're here to walk with you through that. We know it's going to be challenging.
Yeah. All of those things. But no, there was really nothing that we could do that would help them go, yeah, okay, now I understand. They just had to go live it, just like we did. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we sort of joked about later on is that first 6 months after a move was great for our family because we didn't know anybody. So every night at dinner, it was just us. They weren't at a friend's house. They weren't staying overnight with anybody. We weren't connecting with friends because we didn't know anybody either. And we found it to be kind of galvanizing for our family. So these moves, and we made several of them. We moved 6 times, not with our children all the time. My wife and I moved a couple on our own. But the idea is like they were galvanizing times where it was just us. There was nobody else.
Yeah.
And I'm a school guy, so it was always a school calendar. So Halloween, for example, we still didn't know anybody at Halloween, like end of October. And we were out trick-or-treating at places we didn't know with our kids, with just our kids, because there was nobody else in our lives at that point in time. But you get to the second semester, certainly after the first year, there was kids overnights, and then life got back into that routine again.
Yeah.
But for a 6-month period or even more, it was just us. And we look back on some of those times as some of the best times for our family.
Well, and even just the bond that your kids created with one another. So many times,
right.
I mean, as families, we are so busy, and it is like ships in the night, just passing one another. And hey, who's home for dinner? Who's not? And this isn't. And it's young kids, teenage kids, and of course, then you throw sports into the mix. You throw in lots of business travel or whatever. And that bonding time doesn't happen.
Right.
And the kitchen table or the dining room table, those times of conversation and connection are sometimes lacking. And so I think that's a great recognition that you've made in saying that, for those 6, for that season, those 6 months, there were some challenges, there were some difficulties, some tears probably that were shed by the kids and you and Val at times. Yeah. But those were a bonding moment together. I remember having a conversation with a old seminary professor, and I asked him. I said, "Man, wait! It just seems like so much of your family's so close. Like, just the kids are close. You guys. It just seems like you just really enjoy being together, and they're all approaching adulthood. Right. So, what are some things that you did intentionally?" And he said, well, we went to be missionaries for a couple of years, like in Africa or something. And when all of a sudden all you had is each other, you didn't even have a common language with other people. It just bonded you together. The point is that we shouldn't have to move to a new city or to go on a 2-year mission trip. But those types of things, and so being intentional post that of saying, okay, how do we not lose that? Right. Those times of connection as a family.
Yeah, which is easy to do. The other thing is our daughters, and I think our son would have said the same thing. We have 2 daughters and a son, and they all said going to college was easier as well because we all knew what it was like to walk into a school that you didn't know anybody, make new friends, some of that. So I think that some of those transitions are a bit easier when you've moved versus somebody that has not moved all through their school years and then go to college somewhere and go, I've never done this before. All of our kids had done it 1 or 2 times during their K-12 experience.
Yeah. So you mentioned Leadership South Dakota. You started that in 2013. Ish, right? Right. So where did the vision come from to say, we want to start this organization? Yeah. So when I was a dean at USD, we were visiting some friends of ours in Wyoming, and Dan, my friend, and Lynn was my wife's friend. And Dan said, I just finished Leadership Wyoming. And I said, so what's Leadership Wyoming? He told me about it. Of course, same kind of program that Leadership South Dakota became. So as we were driving home that next day, I said to my wife, that program's really intriguing to me and love to think about doing that in South Dakota. We didn't have anything like that at the time. And so we did, and it was just one of those ideas, as you've had them too, Tom, where they just don't leave your thought process. So you kind of think, oh, well, I'm too busy for that. And then it comes back and it comes back. And finally, I just said, I'm going to start to ask some questions of sponsors. Dana Dykehouse would be one. Mike Begeman was at Sanford at that time. He was another. Reached out, and they were like, yeah, you should do this. This is a good idea. And so that's really how it all started. We were walking in a field in Wyoming, and this guy had this, I just finished this program, and without that conversation, again, random, where does God show up? Fields in Wyoming, he shows up and says, you should do this. And it worked out. It was just a wonderful experience for us. It was right thing at the right time of our lives to do something together. Valerie and I did it together. And I was at a point in my career where I was ready to do something like that. So it just, again, God provided a really rich opportunity for us for 9 years, and we loved it. Yeah. Well, and your passion for leadership, helping others grow in leadership, bringing people together, all of that was on display. And I know that one of the goals that you had based on some conversations that we had was that you'd always kind of hope that you would see it through to year 10, like saying, to get to do a decade of leadership in Leadership South Dakota, and you made it 90% of the way there.
Yeah, I did.
You made it 90% of the way there. And you said, okay, it's time for me to, step out from, leading Leadership South Dakota in the way it is, and to hand it over into the capable hands of John Meyer here in town. But tell me about just the feelings that went into handing that off, because as someone who started, RESGEN now almost 14 years ago, well, actually, almost 15 years ago now. Yeah. It'll be 15 years in 2025, which is crazy. Yeah. Like, just the thought of like, man, someday, I'm going to be handing this off. And, thankfully over the last several years, we've built a structure where if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, it can continue if the board chooses to do that.
Right.
But at any rate, just like thinking about, this is your baby.
Yeah.
And this is something that yes, it was maybe templated a little bit from the things you learned from Leadership Wyoming or whatever, but this is still something that you created from nothing, that God used, that God blessed. And then you said, okay, it's time to release it. Right. So how did you know, first of all, how did you know it was time to step down?
It was just, Valerie and I did it together, and we really enjoyed doing it together. It was fun. And we both started to realize that, this is going to end at some point. We did the state government program along with our regular, what we called our flagship program. So we ended up doing it like 12 months out of the year, not 6 months out of the year. So it became more work than what we originally planned. And that was really my fault. I wanted to do the state government side of it, and we did that. And I think a combination of that becoming a bit more involved than we maybe thought, and then second of all, 9 grandchildren, and more requests for, are you going to be around? Hey, we got a softball tournament. And we're like, sorry, we're gone. We're going to be in the reservation. We're in Rapid City. We're in Aberdeen. And we started to realize, the eternal things of life were missing because we're doing this Leadership South Dakota thing, which we love, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's like we're missing out on things that we aren't going to get a chance to do again eventually. So it just seemed right. And I also think, again, back to making a lot of moves, I walked away from things before and saw that they continued on. Like nothing changed. In fact, I was replaced before I even left. And people quickly started looking past me to the next person, because that's how it works, right? It's all, anything you do on the earthly side is all temporary. It's not, it's not eternal. And so you get replaced. And I think that made it easier for me to walk away, even if we started it, which we did. But it's just like any other job. I mean, it meant a lot to us that we started it, but at the same time, it's going to live on after we're gone. And it's not going to define who we are. It's really going to be just something that we did for a period of time. There's a lot more things that are more eternal than that. So as much as we loved the program, it was one of those things where we just kind of both knew it was time. And we weren't going to go out separately. We were either going to go together or not. And it was just the right time to do it.
Yeah. Well,
and Moses didn't get to the promised land. But David didn't build the temple. There's a lot of biblical examples of people getting close, but not quite there. Yeah. And God was like, no, you're not going to get to do that. I mean, I'm sorry. I know you want to, but it's not going to happen. And that was kind of how I looked at year 10, was like, I kind of want to get to year 10, but it's only because I want to get to year 10.
You want to be able to say you did it.
That's right.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
It's not about anything else other than, I want to get to year 10. And I thought, you know what? And I actually thought about those biblical examples and thought, God, just like, no, it's time now. Don't wait another year. And it worked out fine.
Yeah,
and John's doing a really nice job.
Yeah, and it continues to do great work, and but one of those things too is, I mean, you're a relationship guy.
Yeah,
and as much as we say, like, okay, listen, I'm gonna transition out, I'm gonna be not around as much. We'll still stay in contact. We'll still build those relationships, which is difficult. And I know that you do that, but what you did was you chose the relationships that were. Not that these other relationships weren't important. I know that you're not hearing that, but like the relationships with your grandkids,
right,
was more important.
Yes, it is.
And making that difficult decision, because at the end of the day, those relationships are going to continue on and on. And the older those grandkids get,
right,
the busier their schedule gets.
Absolutely.
And the times of connection are
Yeah.
Further and further between.
I'm reading a lot of old man and old woman books, now, like how to end well, how to finish well. And one of them was like, who do you want in the room? Who do you want in the room when it's all over with? If you're assuming, you're on your the old on your deathbed quote.
Yeah.
And, I would joke like, I wouldn't say to my wife, I just want the Leadership South Dakota class from 2021 to, could you get them all in here for, no, I won't say that. I'm going to say, as much as we love all of those people.
Totally, 100%.
It's like, I want my grandkids, I want my kids, like, who do you want in the room? And at the end of the day, that's where you should be spending your time. And interestingly enough, you don't always get a lot of accolades for spending time with those people. You get the feedback from the external things that you're doing. And if we watch our grandkids for 3 days, nobody's going to post that on social media and go, look at what the Melmers are doing. No, that's just going to be, but it's the most important work we could do.
Right.
Compared to kind of the earthly honors that we want to receive. This is like eternal work, but oftentimes it's unappreciated and unnoticed. Mm-hmm. Just like parenting.
Well, and I commend you on that because there's so much research that shows, and I don't know the exact percentage, but I just remember, back in the day, James Dobson talking about the importance of grandparents in children's lives, right, and the influence that grandparents have. And especially at a certain age, they reach the teenage years, the influence of parents goes down as far as just the listening ear.
Right.
But their listening ear actually awakens so much more to grandparents.
Yeah.
And it's just that relationship. And maybe it's because you can take them to the carnival and sugar them up and go home, or, back from, they have those memories of being kids.
You do get the good side of the relationship.
Sure,
no doubt.
but you also have the experience to really invest in different ways.
Yeah.
And, again, you're at a season where you've kind of you've allowed yourself to slow down.
Right.
To where, when you're parents and you're just raising the kids and you're in your career and you're trying to just make things, you're just in it. And so you're just consistently tired.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. The other thing I think is important is just to always be looking forward, not looking back. And I've had to work at that. But the idea of, in fact, the advice I give younger people that are, maybe in a job that they don't enjoy, which happens a fair amount, is I'll say, don't run from, run to. Like, don't run from something that you find difficult or unpleasant. Run to something that you think is a better fit for who you are and what you want to be.
That's good.
And in my case, we didn't run from Leadership South Dakota. We ran to something that we think we were called to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is exactly, and then you ran towards what's this. So,
grandparents. Yeah.
So, Rick, what have you learned about yourself, like maybe that you didn't know, or learn more about yourself in this season of slowing down, leaving the rat race of growing the career and the adding more things to your plate and filling the calendar more.
Yeah.
What have you learned about yourself during this time?
That's a good question, Tom. I feel like one of the things is I've learned that I don't have to make a lot of the decisions, that some of these things work themselves out without me engineering them. Because I oftentimes thought I had to have my fingers on everything that was happening. And even when we knew we were going to leave Leadership South Dakota, and I didn't know whether I knew I couldn't stay at home and just sit around all the time. So I knew I either had to get a part-time job or do a little bit of consulting work on my own.
Yeah.
And so I actually read Mark Batterson's Draw the Circle, the kind of the 40-day devotional.
Circle
and I
Maker,
just the Circle Maker.
Yeah.
I just decided I was going to do that for 40 days and just allow God to sort of speak to me. I was hoping.
Mm-hmm.
I gave him a time frame, 40 days. But at the same time, I thought if in this window of time, maybe I get some feelings like, Rick, this is what I think you should do. Mm-hmm. So I tried to intentionally pull back and just listen to what God had to say. And I think it really helped me. By the time I finished the study, I knew, I should just do my own thing, like my own consulting work at a pace that I can handle and manage. And I just felt crystal clear to me. But I don't think if I would have tried to engineer it right out of the gate, I think I might have messed it up. I'd have probably found a part-time job or something that maybe I wouldn't have enjoyed. So I feel like one of the things I've learned is to sort of step back and allow God a little bit more room in the things that are going on, whether it's personal struggles within our family or career decisions or whatever. It's like, let me make a little bit more room for the Lord here instead of me thinking it's up to me to decide all this, because it really isn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the understanding that regardless of the season that we're in, our profession that we're in, that God has a purpose for us,
Mm-hmm.
and it's to fulfill His purpose. So, have you seen your purpose change, or have you seen it just morph into like fulfilling in a different way, or where are you at with that?
Good question. So I feel like I'm a teacher at heart.
Yeah.
That's really what I like to do. That's what I think I'm built to do. I masqueraded as a leader for about 30 years. But really, at the end of the day, I think I'm a teacher. I think that's what it fills my cup. I love it. I get energy from it. And I feel like people probably don't do enough of that, and maybe I didn't either. Maybe I should have just been a teacher for 40 years instead of doing some of the other things I did, although they were wonderful opportunities. But I feel like, and I'm in this mode now where I teach some leadership work about the 3 E's. Do what you enjoy. Like, are you finding joy in your work? Second of all, are you equipped to do it? Are people telling you, hey, you're really good at that? Like you feel like you're good at it, and you're getting affirmation that you're good at it. Because sometimes other people need to affirm that in us.
Oh, totally.
And then the third one is the environment right? Because sometimes the first two are a yes, but the third one is, well, sorry, I've got a young family. I can't afford to do that, or we can't move, or we can't relocate. So the environment's not right. So the answer has to be no to them. But if all three of them are yes, do I enjoy it? Yes. Am I equipped to do it? Yes, I am. I've been told by people I am. And is the environment right? Yes, I think I can do that. Then it's like, pursue it. And really the 3 E's applied in my case. Do I enjoy teaching? Yes. Am I equipped to do it? I am. And is the environment right? I'm on the path to retirement. Yes, it is. So I'm also learning that about myself. Like, I'm really, at the end of the day, I'm a teacher. And I hope everybody could be able to say that about, like, what are you really good at? And then whatever you're really good at, work at it and become great at it if you can, and you're going to be really happy.
One of the things that you've continued to talk about, Rick, is just yours and Valerie's teamwork through the different seasons. And so is that still, as you think about this teaching, I'm sure she loves all the lessons you teach her on a regular basis.
She soaks them up.
Sits at your feet and says, "What are you going to teach me today,
More,
honey?"
yeah, right.
but so where are you seeing your teamwork, in this season of life?
Yeah, she's been great, but I'm still working some, not as much as I was, and she's really fully retired, and embracing it and loving it. But she's kind of my conscience to go, Rick, we need to do this. This is important. Are you carving out time for us to do this or that? And whether it's grandchildren, children, family, friends that are having weddings or whatever, she's the one that's saying, you've got to make time for this or that. And without that, Tom, I'm afraid I would still be chasing a lot of things that I shouldn't be chasing. So she keeps me grounded on the eternal things that we really need to pay attention to. And we've had this wonderful partnership for over 40 years, and I'm grateful that God put her in my life, and it's been wonderful ever since. And we're very different people.
Yeah.
So again, if you're married to somebody that's different than you, you should thank God for that. Like, they're bringing something to the table that you don't have, and we like to say better together, and we are better together.
And it is interesting just in thinking about marriage and just like, what's God even teaching you? Because He continues to teach us more about ourselves, about Him in different seasons, about our spouse, kids, all that kind of stuff, right? But sometimes in marriage, the things that were opposite of us and what originally drew us together,
right,
like all of a sudden becomes the things that now are causing friction.
We fight over.
And to hear you say, like, listen, we're very different people. We've had 40 years of living with those differences, right? And I'm sure there have been disagreements along the way.
Course,
and again, I love to say that Laura and I don't argue. We have intense fellowship, and so, that's like the one joke I have. But anyway, but like to hear just the celebration of those differences. And I think, again, just even going back to what you said towards the beginning of our time here together, during difficult times, we can forget to be grateful of so much. But the same thing goes as, man, let's make sure that we are just celebrating these differences that we have as couples and the way that we even each other out. And like, if Laura was as driven, we would drive each other nuts if we were as driven as each other.
Right.
And I know that sometimes I can just drive her bonkers, but at the same time, there's also some things that she's like, oh man, I really love that about you. Yeah. The same thing as when I look at her, the detail orientedness and just like the structure and the time that I have to give, like if we're going to leave to go on a day trip somewhere, it's what time are we leaving?
Yeah.
What is the weather going to be? Like, okay, is lunch going to be at a nice place? Is it like, I've got to be all detailed out because I'm just like, I don't know. Like, we're going to end up somewhere. She's like, yeah, I'm going to need to know more, and sometimes that can drive me bananas, but yet I'm always so thankful when we get there and she's prepared.
Yep, absolutely. Well, the other thing that happens as your kids get older is they begin to see the value in a good marriage model. And our kids have been good about saying thanks for modeling a good marriage for us so that we know what it looks like when we're in the middle of ours. So, and again, I didn't say perfect marriage. I said like a good marriage. Like we've tried hard to do that. And I just think those are the long game. That's the long game that you're playing that you don't even think about when they're little and you're managing all that. But to be able to give your kids that security of saying your mother and I love each other and we work hard at it. And by the way, there is going to be a day when the kids are gone. Your guys are there now, and then it's just the two of you. Yeah. And if you haven't invested the time early, it's going to be really hard to sort of fast forward it late.
Right. Yeah. A quote that I just read that I loved was just don't just teach it, live it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
And as a teacher at heart, that's your heart. To teach, but then you've also backed that up with living it and modeling that for your kids.
Right.
Preach
the gospel, and if you need to use words.
And but at the same time, because it is necessary, use words. So it's a both and, right? Yeah. And things are caught and taught.
Right.
Most often they are caught before they're taught.
I would agree.
A lot of times, or they really become ingrained into our heart and our mind because we've seen it in action.
I agree.
And so that's such a good thing. Yeah. So let me ask you this, because we've got just about 10 more minutes together here. But are there things or disciplines, habits that you've adopted since your life is slowing down now? You are approaching a retirement, to utilize the language that you used. Are there certain disciplines or habits that you've maybe put into place or adopted either newly or in preparation for this, just to remind you that God isn't done using you yet?
Yeah. There's a model that I use when I do some leadership training. It's I call it the balance table, but it's body, mind, soul, and heart. And the body is the physical vessel that we all occupy. And my wife and I love to bike, and we love to walk, and we really invest time and energy together in that. And I have found, and in the reading that I'm doing, they just say, being physically healthy has such a huge impact on all the other parts of our lives. If we feel good, then everything else has a way of sort of working out a little bit better. The mind part of it, I'm a reader. I like to read, and I just love reading, and I have more time to do that now, and I enjoy it. But typically for the purpose of teaching. I like to read so I can share what I've learned with somebody else. That's kind of my motivation. I don't know what's going to happen when I have nobody else to share it with, but right now I still do. And then
you'll come back on the podcast
there
again.
We go. Tell you about my latest book. And then the soul part is that sort of daily devotion. My wife and I have devotions together, and her and I doing that and praying together has probably been the one thing that has been the most significant thing in our lives. Is every morning we do a devotion together, we pray together, and we have a list of people and family members that we pray for by name. And that's been a powerful tool for us in our marriage, and it's been good for us in a spiritual sense as well. And then the last one is just the heart part of it, which I think has been a part of my balance table that I've ignored for too long, and that is like cultivating healthy friendships. Because as a school superintendent, I didn't have a lot of friends. I had a lot of people I had to be careful about because of who knows when you might have to make a decision or something about that person. And then it's just not really in my DNA. I'm kind of a bit of an introvert. I can be okay with just sort of, small conversations. So I'm trying to be intentional as I get older about cultivating really meaningful friendships. And I still have work to do in that department, but those are the 4 areas that I'm learning about myself and I feel like I really need to pay attention to.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. So there's a couple more questions, and then we can end our time here together. But this is one that in your years of working with young people and with younger generations of leaders. What can the older generation, so those that are maybe approaching retirement, that have been in leadership a long time, what can the older generation do to better support and encourage the younger generation of leaders that's coming?
That's really good, Tom. That's a good question. I'm finding now in my sort of semi-retirement stage that leadership coaching is something I'm doing more of, just one-on-one work with individual leaders that a company might say, we got 5 people that we want to do this training, and so I'm doing that. And I really am trying to provide support and encouragement for younger people. I feel like sometimes as older leaders, we think our job is to tell everybody else how it should be done. Like, I learned all these things and now it's my turn to tell you. Instead of saying, I'm going to be an encourager. I'm going to just encourage them, ask good questions, help them arrive at the solutions that they think are the best, not telling them what to do. In fact, they like to say, mentors tell, coaches ask. And I feel like older leaders need to do more coaching and less mentoring. Like, just be available and listen, ask good questions, and allow and challenge people to come up with their own answers, and not do when I was your age, I did this and this. Maybe occasionally that works, but for the most part, my experience has been people don't want my advice, they want my encouragement. And if I can offer anything in terms of questions or resources that they might be able to read or study, that's helpful. And I think I can do that. But I think it's less about like telling stories and more about asking good questions and encouraging people in their walk, whatever it is that they want to do. And I do think at times people that are my age think, well, you should listen to me because I've been alive 20 years longer than you or whatever. And, I've got things to say and it's your time to listen. When really it should be like, well, how can I help you?
Oh, yeah.
Like, what are some things I can do that might help you in your walk? Instead of me telling you what you should do, I should be asking you, how can I help?
Yeah.
What value can I add?
That's good. Now let me flip this script and the question just a little bit. And how can the younger generation better appreciate or honor the older generation of leaders?
Yeah.
Is it the same?
I think it is the same. I think it's like asking people, so, when you were in this role, what worked for you? What are 2 or 3 things that you think helped you become successful? Because I think a lot of those things, Tom, haven't changed very much. Like a good communication and being present and, all the things that were true 30 years ago are still true today. Yeah. But I just feel like, an old man talking is not necessarily going to solve it. But if they arrive at those same, like, maybe I need to be more present. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. That might be a good idea for you to be more present. It's much better if they come up with it. And I think the same thing would be true. Older people would feel valued and appreciated. Yeah. If younger people would ask more questions about, so what was it like when you were there, and be genuinely interested. I think that would sure bridge the generation gap a whole lot more. But I think we have a lot of age bias in our world today. We look at younger people and go, they don't have an idea what's going on, and younger people look at me and go, he's over the hill, and I think we both could learn from each other under the right circumstances.
Yeah, that's good.
I do think the coaching thing is a step towards that, but I think you have to learn how to be a good coach. And I've had to learn how to be a good coach because initially I started out being a storyteller. Like, well, I'll tell you about a time when that happened to me. And I've learned over time that glassy eyes and kind of a yeah. And pretty soon I realized they're not really all that interested in that. They really want me to talk about them and ask questions about them. Yeah. And when I finish a coaching session, one of the things I like to ask is like, who did most of the talking? Which is just what you're doing on this podcast. Like, who did most of the talking? I did, not you, right? You're asking questions, you're letting me talk. That's the same thing is true in coaching sessions. Like, ask good questions and let them talk. They're going to arrive at their own answers that are going to be really good. Yeah, that's good. Well, brother, I know that this conversation has been very fruitful for me, and I know that it has been for those that have been listening as well. And like I said, we've kind of been focusing on just this whole conversation about transitions. I do have one more transition I want to talk about with you before I give you an opportunity just to kind of give a final word here at the end, anything that the Lord lays on your heart to end our time here together. But the transition that I'd love to just talk for a few minutes about is what you mentioned that Laura and I are now involved in, and that is the empty nesting season of life. Chase is home for the summer. This episode is airing in the fall, but so Chase was home over the summer, which
we kind of got used to the freedom, Rick, to
I'll
be
bet
honest
you
with
did.
you.
I'll bet you enjoyed that.
We had 9 months of freedom at our house, where all of a sudden now it's like he's here every day again, every night. But the specifically this is the parenting of adult children.
Yeah.
And you've been doing that for a fair amount of years now. And Laura and I are entering into that season. A lot of those that are in my peer and friends group, same thing. They're entering into that parenting adult children season of life. What is some of the best advice that you could give Laura and I and those that are kind of in this season that we're in on just parenting adult children?
Yeah, that's great. A good question. And we're still working on it, but I think Valerie and I have learned some things. Early on, we thought that they would want our advice. They really don't. And if they do want it, they'll ask for it. Like they'll say, "Hey, what do you think I should do?" And by the way, I could probably count on two hands how many times my 3 children and their spouses have said to me, "What do you think we should do?" Right? They don't, they love us.
Yeah.
They don't want us to solve their problems. They want to solve their problems. And so we decided years ago, my wife and I said, you know what? We need to be master encouragers. Like our job is going to be to encourage our children, our spouses, their spouses, our grandchildren. We are going to believe the best about all of our kids and our grandkids, and we're going to focus on encouraging. And it has been the best thing we could have done. Is quit thinking we're the sage on the stage and we're going to provide all this advice and counsel, even though once in a while it does happen. But like you said earlier, it's more about they've watched us do something.
Yeah.
Not so much what we've said, it's like what we've done. And we have just focused on encouragement, and it has been awesome. I mean, we just decide we're going to be encouragers, and anytime something, and by the way, with grandkids, it's not hard. With children, it is hard because you want to fix them. But when your grandkids come along, they're perfect, just the way they are. Don't change one thing about that grandchild. They're just the way they're supposed to be. And again, that's the balcony thing. That's like getting up on the balcony and looking down and going, you don't have to change one thing. Right? Perfect, just the way they are.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah. So just if I could give one piece of advice, it would be a master encourager.
Yeah.
Just focus your energies on building your children up, building their spouses up, building your grandkids up. That's a very good role for a grandparent to play. Believe me, there's enough out there to bring them down. They need people to lift them up.
Yeah, that is really good. I mean, that is gold. As you can see, I was writing down.
I'll bet you're really good at it, Tom.
So. They don't really want our advice. That was such a good line. It's such a good, and I think about a book that I've mentioned here a couple of times. Ted Cunningham's the one that introduced me to it. Just the whole idea of doing life with your adult children by Jim Burns. Keep your mouth shut and they'll welcome Matt out. Yeah. And there was a line in that book, Rick, that just speaks exactly to what you said here. And it's that unsolicited advice comes off as criticism. Yeah. And that's the line. But I'm going to tell you something. It is so hard for me not to give advice.
Oh yeah,
and it's not because it's just because you care so deeply, right? And you just sometimes you think that you can see all these steps, that our foreknowledge is so much better than theirs, right. And in some situations it is because we've been there. Yeah. But yet at the same time, how do we learn? We learn through experience. Right. We learn through just going and blazing a trail. And how do we let our kids have the freedom to do that? And so this was a really good convicting word that you gave me here today.
And the other thing is, they're raising their kids in a different generation than we raised our kids. So for us to say, well, here's how we did it. Well, we didn't have iPhones to deal with. Yeah. We didn't have iPads to deal with. We didn't have tablets. So the whole social media, all the technology is so much different than it was 20 or 30 years ago. And so it is a different world. And for us to be able to go, you just need to do this or that, it's not quite that simple anymore. So our job is like, you're doing great. Yeah. Keep it up. Because raising kids is hard, very hard. And our kids don't need one more person to say, well, I think you ought to do this. If you want to, make sure your kids don't stop over and visit a lot, give them a lot of advice. And they're going to kind of go, we're not going to go over there because all we do is get, an earful of all the things we should be doing. And our focus needs to be, you're doing great. Because they are.
That's so good. That just reminds me of the picture that I get as you're saying that is in the old Rocky movies, with Burgess Meredith in the corner. Rocky's getting pummeled in the corner. Right?
You're a killer.
And he's like, you can do it, Rocky. That's what
you're a machine.
And in no way am I saying you're Burgess Meredith.
No,
right?
No, thanks. The Penguin. Yeah.
but I mean, just that idea of and I think about Isaiah just turned 23 and he came over and we had dinner and just we wrote in his card is, I'll always be in your corner.
Yeah, that's right.
And just
I'm proud of you.
Exactly. And
right.
you can never say it enough and they can never hear it enough.
No, that's right.
So being a master encourager.
Right. And really meaning it, which I know would be true, but I mean, this idea of like, I'm just going to rattle off these phrases. No, I'm like, mean it. Find reasons to encourage and say, I'm really serious about this, and write notes and, do it in a lot of different ways so the kids get the message that my parents are for me.
Yeah. That's so good. Well, Rick, again, I thank you for the encouragement you are to my life. No, for real.
I appreciate that, Tom. And you've been a blessing to me too.
It's always good when we get to spend time together, whether it's over coffee or just randomly running into each other at Costco, where all great relationships, relationships are deepened.
If they don't have it, you don't need it.
The heavens open up, angels sing, all that kind of stuff. But so as you may remember from your time here and the episodes that you've listened to, we just end our time with something just called the final word. And, 30 to 60 seconds of whatever the Lord lays on your heart could be a scripture that he's been speaking to you on, or just a final shot of encouragement, whatever that you have for the listeners. So you got a final word for us today?
Yeah, it's real simple. In this case, I hadn't really thought about it until just now, but we say this to our kids every so often, God first, spouses and children second, and work third. That idea, we get those mixed up. I got them mixed up a lot. Work became first, and God was second or maybe third, depending on the day or the week. And I just keep coming back to the idea, if you really want a life that's filled with purpose and meaning, it's God first and your spouse second. I mean, like that idea of like spouse first and kids next. Yeah. And then of course work and all the other things that come third. And I just feel like it's a real simple little 3-step process, and yet easy for us to get caught up in putting things before God. And if we keep the order in the right order, everything's going to work out fine.
Yeah. Well, Rick, thank you, brother. I appreciate you. Thanks for being in my life. Thanks for being a guest on the podcast today. And thank you for continuing to seek out fulfilling God's purpose, not just throughout your career, but as you enter this new season. And I know that you're going to continue doing that every step of the way. So thanks for who you are.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Rick Melmer today. If you found our conversation helpful, I encourage you to share it with others in your relational world that may find it helpful as well. If you'd like to connect more with Rick, you can do so on LinkedIn. All right. Thanks again for joining me today, everybody, and we'll see you next time on the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast. Until then, continue being men whose life in Christ gives life to others.